And joining us right now is Michael Calderone. He writes for the Huffington Post. He has his column called The Backstory, which analyzes the media. And Michael Calderone, you have some sources on the Washington Post staff because you paint a very dramatic picture about yesterday's very dramatic announcement. Tell us what you learned about the sale of the Washington Post.
Right. Well, thanks for having me, first off. So, Catherine Weymouth, the publisher of the Washington Post and the granddaughter of the great Catherine Graham, the longtime late steward of the Washington Post, she convened a meeting around 4:15, and reporters, obviously being reporters, were kind of guessing and speculating what would happen. The most people thought that maybe they had sold the Washington Post building, which they were trying to do. But the news that greeted them by Don Graham was just shocking. People said that the room got immediately quiet. Some staffers told me they found it very moving to hear Don Graham talk about the Washington Post newspaper, which his family has run for generations, and why they felt the need to finally sell it. And at the end, there was a long-standing ovation for Don Graham, and people, while shocked, at the same time, there was a lot of hopefulness that, now they have somebody who has billions and billions of dollars who might be able to keep the newspaper going.
Yeah, and that person is Jeff Bezos. He's the founder of Amazon, of course, and he is quoted just 1 year ago saying that within 20 years there will be no more newspapers printed. It will all be digital. Is there some concern, or is there, as you put it, hope that Bezos is going to really revolutionize the way the newspaper is run?
I think there are some concerns. This is somebody who really has no background in newspapers. When Rupert Murdoch buys a newspaper, there's, whether somebody agrees with his politics or not, the expectation is that this is a guy that absolutely loves newsprint. He loves newspapers, and there's a feeling that there's more security there. With Bezos, it's really a wild card. There's no real you can't really look back on any other experience, but people see that he is truly an innovator, and what he's done with Amazon is incredible, and there's a sense and there's a hopefulness from some in the newsroom that maybe he can take some of that magic and it'll wear off on the Post.
Well, let's just talk about reality. I mean, revenues have declined dramatically over the last 10 years. One of the most expensive things that a newspaper does is print a dead tree version that goes plop at the end of your driveway. That sound of the newspaper plopping is a very expensive proposition. I mean, aren't we destined to have a time and a place in the not-too-distant future where we no longer have an actual physical newspaper that we would hold in our hand?
I mean, that's definitely a trend where things are going, where a print newspaper will be luxury item. It might be something that is very expensive to actually own a print newspaper on a Sunday morning, whereas the majority of people, and obviously the trend line's younger readers, are gravitating immediately towards the web. I work at a news organization that's never existed on newsprint, and there are many others cropping up every year that don't have that sort of legacy background and never were built around the old classified advertising and dropping newspapers on the front lawn. So, I think that's definitely where things are going. And Bezos has also talked about how consumers expect news to be free online, and that's also interesting because the Washington Post just put up a paywall. So some are now speculating whether they might pull down that paywall, and he may try some sort of strategy to keep the Washington Post content free online.
Well, he's got deep pockets. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
I mean, he paid $250 million for the Washington Post. He's worth $25 billion, so this is like 1% of his personal wealth.
Right, and he's buying this, as they've tried to make clear, he's buying this as for himself. This is not being bought by Amazon. So, I mean, this is a project that he seems to be working on by himself. It was something that he and Don Graham hammered out at a Moguls conference in July.
I want to go to a Moguls conference.
It's not 100% clear, what his plans are, but, at least there's a sense that this guy does not need the Washington Post to turn an immediate profit for him to, keep his lights on at night. Bezos really doesn't need the Post to be hugely profitable right off the bat, so maybe he'll try a new strategy just to try to keep the paper going and somewhat self-sufficient.
Michael Calderone is our guest in his column, The Backstory, over at Huffington Post. If you're interested in the media, it's a must-visit on a daily basis, multiple times a day, in fact. And I wonder, Michael, if you can sort of talk a little bit about the whole idea of a family legacy. You know, you frame your entire article here about Catherine Weymouth, who of course is a member of the Graham family. This is the family that has had the Post in their they've been in charge of the Post since I think the late 40s. Really, you don't see this anymore. You don't see families and the whole idea of legacy in response to or being responsible for a media company. Is this sort of the writing on the wall for the future?
Yeah, the idea of the newspaper family dynasty is really dwindling. We've seen this in the last 10 or 15 years. You had the Chandler family, which sold the Los Angeles Times. The Bancroft family ended up selling the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones in 2007. Other newspaper families as well. One of the last remaining is the Sulzberger family, which owns the New York Times.
Well, and some would argue that
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, some would argue the New York Times has really diminished based on the latest Sulzberger has really been sort of Pinch Sulzberger, I think his nickname is, which he hates, which is why I say it as often as possible, Pinch Sulzberger. They say he's been horrible for the newspaper. It would be better to get someone who actually understands the business.
Well, and you can see there's been some very bad business decisions. Most recently, the New York Times sold the Boston Globe on Saturday for $70 million, which is a fraction of the $1.1 billion that the Times paid for it in 1993. But even not just taking into account that the whole newspaper industry has dropped dramatically since 1993. Even a couple of years ago, you had people willing to spend several $100 million for the Boston Globe, and the New York Times wasn't selling. So, there have been a number of decisions over the years where you could question the business motivations. At the same time, journalists, many at the Times, would say, that the Sulzberger family has always upheld the traditions and standards of journalism. So for journalists, it's okay, at least until, as long as the paper is still running. But I think there's less of a nervousness about a new type of ownership taking over. I think, in the past, and while there was shock about the Graham family no longer owning the Washington Post because they have for 4 generations,
right,
I think there's just an expectation that this is the way things are going. We've seen a number of different ownerships that, of legacy products going to tech billionaires or to others that never had any experience in the newspaper business in the past.
All right. We're going to have to leave it at that. Michael Calderone, thank you so much for
stuff,
all
Michael.
this.
Thanks.
I'd love to have you back again to talk about other stuff going on in the media as well.